The courtroom doors opened with a heavy groan, and the room stood as Judge William Carter entered. He walked with the measured authority of a man who had seen it all until his eyes locked on me. For a heartbeat, his steps faltered, his face drained of color. "My God," he whispered, barely audible, but loud enough to freeze every juror and attorney in place. "It's her." The gallery turned as one, scanning me, the plaintiff they'd painted as unstable, unfit, a broken veteran fighting for scraps of a family estate. They didn't know the truth. Not yet. But the man on the bench did. And in that instant, everyone in that courtroom realized this case was about to become something far bigger than money. To understand why a federal judge froze at the sight of me, you need to know what brought us here. My name is Elena Cruz, eldest daughter of Colonel Miguel Cruz, a decorated Army officer who spent 3 decades in uniform before passing away 2 years ago. His legacy wasn't just medals and folded flags, it was the family estate he built brick by brick, and a trust designed to preserve it for the next generation. But in my family, legacy was never safe. My younger sister, Valeria, and her ambitious husband, Thomas Grayson, saw opportunity in grief. While I was still attending my father's funeral honors in Arlington, they were already drawing up papers. Their narrative was simple and cruel. Elena came back from Iraq unstable, too broken to handle money or responsibility. Their goal? Strip me of trustee rights and seize control of everything my father left behind. At first, it looked like an ordinary probate dispute. But it didn't take long for their campaign to escalate. They whispered to relatives, hinting that I was dangerous. They pushed stories into the press, branding me a fragile veteran, one headline at a time. The worst blow came when they filed evidence, a so-called psychiatric file from the VA claiming I was unfit for duty. On paper, it looked damning. To outsiders, it was the final nail in my credibility. But I knew better. My father had trusted me explicitly, and he had left behind more than memories. In the weeks before the trial, I uncovered a locked strongbox in his study inside, documents that would change everything. I walked into that courtroom knowing my sister and her husband weren't just after property. They were after my name, my honor, my father's dying wish, and I was ready to fight back. The first strike didn't come from across the courtroom, it came from the evening news. One Monday night, I turned on the TV to hear my own name sandwiched between crime stories and weather alerts. The anchor's voice was calm, almost casual. Questions are being raised about Army veteran Elena Cruz's mental fitness as she enters a bitter family trust dispute. Behind him, my photo flashed across the screen, uniform creased, eyes tired, cropped from a deployment ceremony years earlier. And beneath it, in bold letters, "Unstable veteran?" My phone lit up with messages before the segment even ended. Old friends, colleagues, even fellow soldiers asking, "What's going on, Elena? Are you okay?" I knew exactly where it had come from. Valeria and Thomas had decided to fight dirty. The very next morning, Thomas filed a motion attaching what he called verified medical records from the Department of Veterans Affairs. On the surface, the documents looked official. VA letterhead, patient ID, stamped dates. The report claimed I had been diagnosed with severe PTSD, that I'd been deemed unfit for financial decision-making, and that I had failed compliance with prescribed therapy. It was all lies. Yes, I'd seen things overseas that no one should ever see. Yes, I carried memories I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. But I had never been declared incompetent. I had never failed treatment. The file was a fabrication, carefully engineered to weaponize the stigma surrounding veterans and mental health. And it worked for a while. Neighbors avoided me in the grocery store. One even whispered, "Careful, that's the Cruz girl from the news." At the courthouse, reporters swarmed, shoving microphones in my face. "Major Cruz, are you a danger to yourself? To your family? Should someone with your record control millions in assets?" Every question felt like a knife. Valeria stayed quiet, letting Thomas play frontman. He smirked through interviews, shrugging in mock concern. "We love Elena, of course we do," he told one outlet. "But when someone's been through the things she has, you can't ignore the medical evidence. We just want to make sure the estate is safe, for everyone's sake. He framed himself as the protector, me as the threat. Inside the courtroom, their attorneys doubled down. They waved the documents like holy scripture, demanding the judge take judicial notice of my supposed instability. They leaned into the narrative. She's a veteran. She's damaged. She can't be trusted with her father's legacy. It wasn't just an attack on me. It was an attack on every soldier who had ever come home carrying invisible scars. I wanted to scream. Instead, I sat stone-faced at counsel's table, my attorney squeezing my arm under the desk. "Don't let them see you rattle," he whispered. But I could feel the damage setting in. Even the jurors stole glances at me, their expressions unreadable. Was it sympathy or suspicion? Meanwhile, the media frenzy escalated. Talk radio hosts dissected my life like I was a headline, not a human being. "If this Major Cruz can't even manage her own trauma," one caller said, "how can she manage millions of dollars?" I barely slept. When I did, I woke drenched in sweat, the words unstable veteran chasing me through nightmares. But somewhere beneath the exhaustion, a steel edge hardened. My father hadn't trusted me with his estate by accident. He knew I was strong enough to carry it, strong enough to carry him, even after he was gone. And I wasn't about to let forged paperwork erase that. So while Thomas grinned for cameras, I got to work. My attorney and I began pulling threads, scrutinizing every line of the so-called VA records. It didn't take long to spot the cracks. The font style didn't match standard VA correspondence. The patient ID number was formatted incorrectly. The supposed signature block listed a doctor who had retired 3 years before the report's date. Individually, the details might look like mistakes. Together, they were proof. This wasn't a mistake, it was fraud. Still, we needed more than suspicion. We needed an ironclad takedown. So I reached out to the VA's Records Management Center. The custodian of records swore under oath no such file existed. The report was a fabrication, plain and simple. Meanwhile, I kept my head high in court. Every time Thomas strutted past me, whispering, "You'll lose," I sat taller. Every time Valeria avoided my eyes, I reminded myself her silence wasn't strength. It was guilt. By the 3rd week of proceedings, the smear campaign had reached its peak. Tabloids printed lurid headlines, pundits questioned my sanity, and the defendants acted like victory was inevitable. But I had something they didn't. In my father's study, behind a false panel in his desk, I had discovered a locked strongbox. Inside, the original trust documents, notarized, bulletproof. Pages that clearly named me as the sole trustee, with explicit instructions forbidding the sale or transfer of the estate. And tucked between those papers was a handwritten letter, my father's scrawl, shaky but determined. "Elena, this house is not just wood and brick. It is a pillar. Protect it. Protect us, even when we cannot protect you." Reading those words, I felt his voice in my chest like a steady drumbeat. They had tried to bury me under lies, but now I had the truth, and I was ready to fire it like a weapon. The smear campaign had turned the world against me, but the courtroom battle was only beginning. By the 4th week of trial, the smear campaign had reached a fever pitch. Thomas Grayson swaggered through the courthouse like it already belonged to him. Valeria trailed behind, pale and silent, clutching her handbag like a shield. Their attorneys stacked the forged VA report on their table, highlighter marks glowing under the fluorescent lights. They wanted to hammer me with it again and again, until the jury couldn't unhear the words "unstable veteran." But they didn't know what I had in my possession. That morning, I slid a heavy leather briefcase onto my lap as I waited for the judge to enter. Inside, wrapped in a protective sleeve, lay the documents my father had left behind. The notarized trust, the bank ledgers, and his final handwritten note. For weeks, I had carried it like a secret weapon, waiting for the moment to strike. When Judge Carter finally called the session to order, Thomas's lead attorney stood first. "Your Honor, before proceeding, we again move to disqualify Miss Cruz as trustee on the basis of verified medical evidence from the Department of Veterans Affairs." He held the forged file aloft like a trophy. My attorney rose calmly. Your Honor, before this court takes another step down that road, we have evidence that will not only challenge those documents, but expose them for what they truly are, fabrications. A murmur rippled through the gallery. The judge leaned forward. Proceed. We began with the experts. First up, Dr. Hannah Ng, a forensic document examiner with 20 years of federal service. She walked the jury through the VA file line by line, projecting enlarged scans on the courtroom screen. She pointed out the mismatched font types, the date stamps out of sequence, the incorrect formatting of patient ID codes. These inconsistencies, she explained, are not clerical errors. They're hallmarks of digital forgery. This report was never generated by the Department of Veterans Affairs. The defense squirmed. Thomas shifted in his seat, arms crossed, face red. Next came the VA's own custodian of records. Sworn in under oath, he stated clearly, I searched every database under Miss Cruz's file number and name. No such report exists. The document entered into evidence is not part of our system, nor could it have been. The gallery buzzed. Reporters scribbled furiously. For weeks, the media had painted me as unstable. Now, on record, a VA officer declared the entire case against me was built on lies. But we weren't finished. My attorney called in a financial auditor, a quiet man in glasses who had reviewed my father's estate records for months. He confirmed every asset was intact, every account reconciled, every property protected exactly as my father intended. There is no evidence of mismanagement by Miss Cruz, he concluded. On the contrary, the estate shows deliberate planning consistent with her late father's trust documents. That was when I pulled out the strongbox. The bailiff carried it to the clerk's desk. I entered the combinations slowly, deliberately, letting the clicks echo in the silent courtroom. Inside lay the original trust hard copies bearing notarization seals, with my father's signature clear and unbroken. We projected the pages for everyone to see. In bold, black print, I hereby appoint my eldest daughter, Captain Elena Cruz, as sole trustee of my estate. This trust shall not be sold, transferred, or diluted under any circumstance. And then, the letter. I unfolded it with careful hands. The handwriting was shaky but unmistakable, my father's scrawl, the same I'd seen on decades of birthday cards and deployment notes. Elena, it read, this house is not just wood and brick. It is our history, our honor. Hold it, guard it. When others see burden, remember, it is your shield. Protect it, even from those who share our name. I read the words aloud. By the time I finished, half the courtroom was leaning forward, jaws slack. Even Valeria's shoulders trembled as her eyes filled with tears. Thomas erupted. This is outrageous, he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. Anyone could have planted that. It's fabricated, just like... Enough, Judge Carter barked. His gavel cracked the air. Another outburst and you'll be held in contempt. The jury's faces told the story. Where doubt had once lingered, now there was clarity. They weren't looking at me like a broken veteran anymore. They were looking at a daughter carrying out her father's final command. But the most important moment wasn't the paperwork. It was the silence that followed. For weeks, Thomas and his attorneys had shouted, smeared, twisted. For weeks, I had been portrayed as unfit. But now, with the truth laid bare, I didn't need to shout. I simply stood there in my uniform, medals gleaming softly under the lights, and let the silence speak louder than any headline ever could. The defense scrambled, asking for recess, trying to recover. But the damage was done. The narrative they had crafted had collapsed in a single morning. I looked across the aisle at my sister. Valeria's eyes met mine for the first time since this began. They were red, rimmed with shame. Her lips trembled as though she wanted to speak, but Thomas yanked her arm, whispering furiously. The judge called a short break, and as the jury filed out, he looked down at me. His eyes softened just slightly. Miss Cruz, he said, you've carried a heavy weight with dignity. Let's see this case through properly. It wasn't a victory yet, but the tide had turned. I stepped out into the hallway, Reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing. For the first time, I didn't flinch. The world could see me for what I was. Not unstable, not unfit, but unbroken and ready to finish the fight my father had trusted me to win. The defense thought they could recover after lunch, but the cracks were already spreading. The forged VA report was dead. The trust documents were airtight. The jury's eyes no longer carried suspicion, they carried questions. And questions are more dangerous than doubt. But there was one more card left to play. When the trial resumed, Thomas's attorneys tried to claw back credibility. They insisted the court should consider the plaintiff's fragile state of mind regardless of documents. They leaned hard into innuendo, painting me as an unstable veteran who might snap under pressure. That's when my attorney slid a glossy photo onto the evidence projector. The image flickered onto the giant screen above the judge's bench. It was chaos, frozen in time. Floodwaters churning through a Houston neighborhood during Hurricane Harvey. Debris floating in the current. In the center of the photo, a soldier in soaked fatigues, hauling a man in uniform out of the water, one arm wrapped tight under his shoulders. The courtroom leaned forward, murmurs rising. "Miss Cruz," my attorney said, "is that you in this photo?" I swallowed. Yes, that was 2017. I was off duty, but when the levee broke, I joined the rescue teams. "And who?" my attorney asked, his finger pointing at the man being pulled from the flood. "Is this officer you saved?" For a moment, silence hung like smoke. Then the gallery gasped as eyes turned toward the bench. Because the man in the photo wasn't a stranger. He was Captain William Carter, the very man now presiding over this case as Judge Carter. The judge's face stiffened. His knuckles whitened against the edge of the bench. For a second, it looked like he might deny it. But then his shoulders straightened, and his voice cut through the room. "That photo is authentic." He cleared his throat, his voice lower now, charged with something unshakable. "If it weren't for Major Cruz, I would not be alive to sit on this bench today." The room erupted. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Jurors froze, wide-eyed. Valeria gasped audibly, covering her mouth. Even Thomas blanched, his confidence draining out like a punctured tire. Judge Carter raised his gavel, striking once. "Order in the court!" The gallery settled, but the air buzzed with electricity. He turned deliberately toward the jury. "Let me make something clear. This case will not be decided on innuendo or smear campaigns. It will be decided on law and truth. And the truth is this. The plaintiff before you is not only competent, she is decorated. She has demonstrated courage and integrity beyond measure. The defense's tactics of weaponizing stigma against veterans are reprehensible." Each word landed like a hammer. Thomas shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is prejudicial. The judge cut him off with a glare so sharp it could have carved stone. "Sit down, Mr. Grayson, or I will hold you in contempt right now." The jury leaned forward, rapt. The balance of the trial had shifted permanently. For the first time, I allowed myself to breathe. Not because the battle was won, but because the truth had been spoken by someone who owed me nothing, by someone whose very life had been proof of my competence, my strength, my worth. Across the aisle, Valeria's facade cracked. She whispered something to Thomas, shaking her head, tears brimming in her eyes. He grabbed her wrist, hissing back. The bailiff's eyes narrowed, watching closely. Judge Carter, still steady, continued. "I will entertain no further attempts to discredit Miss Cruz with baseless allegations. From this moment forward, arguments will center only on the trust, the law, and the documented evidence. Consider this your warning." Thomas slumped into his chair, muttering curses under his breath. Valeria kept her gaze fixed on the floor. The jury wasn't just swayed, they were galvanized. The very man the defense hoped would be their neutral referee had now stood as a living testament to the plaintiff's honor. And yet, for me, the moment wasn't about victory. It was about vindication. For years, I had carried the stain of being branded unstable, of being erased by the people who should have stood by me. And in one photo, in one truth spoken aloud, that stain was washed away. During recess, whispers filled the hallway. She saved the judge? No wonder he froze when he saw her. This changes everything. Cameras swarmed, but for once, the headlines weren't about scandal. They were about a veteran who had risked her life and carried on without recognition. Back inside, Valeria asked to meet privately with her counsel. When she returned, her face was pale, her lips trembling. She didn't look like my sister who had betrayed me. She looked like a woman realizing the ground beneath her feet had given way. The judge resumed. We will now proceed to examine the remaining exhibits. But I want everyone in this courtroom to understand. This case is no longer about rumor. It is about law. And the law will be upheld. The jury nodded almost in unison. The spell had broken. I sat taller at my table, hands folded. For the first time since the trial began, I didn't feel like the one on defense. I felt like the truth was finally on offense, charging, unstoppable. When court adjourned for the day, I gathered my files, sliding my father's letter back into the strongbox. Reporters shouted questions, but I ignored them. I walked past Thomas, who glared at me with venom, and past Valeria, who couldn't meet my eyes. And for the first time since my father's funeral, I felt the weight on my chest lift. Not because the estate was safe, not yet, but because the truth had finally stood tall in the very place lies were meant to rule. This wasn't just a probate dispute anymore. It was a reckoning, and I was ready to see it through to the end. By the time court reconvened the following morning, the atmosphere inside the Travis County Courthouse was different. Reporters lined the back benches, whispering excitedly, waiting for the fallout from the photograph that had stunned the gallery. The jury filed in with a new sense of focus, as if each of them now carried an obligation to look beyond the noise. But Thomas Grayson still swaggered into the courtroom, his tie knotted too tightly, his jaw set in defiance. He whispered sharply at his lawyers, eyes darting toward me with barely disguised hatred. Valeria trailed behind, her steps hesitant, her eyes red from a night of tears. Judge Carter wasted no time. Before we proceed, he said, his voice carrying across the room, this court has requested the attendance of representatives from the district attorney's office. They will observe and evaluate the authenticity of evidence presented thus far. A prosecutor in a gray suit rose from the second row. Your Honor, we have reviewed the VA records admitted by the defense. In consultation with federal records custodians, we concur with the testimony already provided. These documents are fraudulent. The word fraudulent seemed to hang in the air, heavier than the gavel itself. Thomas's lawyer leapt to his feet. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Sit down, counselor, the judge barked. What is irregular is that this court has been presented with fabricated federal documents. That is not merely a civil matter. That is a crime. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The jury leaned forward, eyes wide. Even Valeria clasped her hands together, trembling. Judge Carter turned toward Thomas. Mr. Grayson, you will surrender your passport to the clerk immediately. You are ordered not to leave the jurisdiction of this court pending further investigation by the district attorney's office. Bailiff, see that it's done. The bailiff stepped forward. Thomas sputtered, color draining from his face. This is outrageous! I'm the victim here. She's manipulating everyone. Enough, the judge thundered. You will not shout over this bench. Another outburst and you will be held in contempt. The bailiff extended his hand, and with a visible shake, Thomas produced his passport. The courtroom was utterly silent as the leather booklet was carried to the clerk's desk, placed into an evidence bag. For the first time since this trial began, Thomas looked small. Valeria, sitting 2 seats away, let out a quiet sob. She covered her face with her hands. Then, in a trembling voice, she spoke. Your Honor, I need to say something. The courtroom stilled. Her attorney tried to hush her, but she shook her head violently. No, I can't keep doing this. She rose unsteadily, tears streaking her cheeks. I signed papers my husband put in front of me without reading them. I thought it was just legal housekeeping. I didn't know he was forging things. I didn't know he was lying. Thomas slammed his palm on the table. Valeria, shut your mouth! The judge's gavel cracked. Mr. Grayson, one more word and you're out of this courtroom. Valeria turned toward me, her voice breaking. Elena, I didn't want to believe you. He told me you were dangerous, that you couldn't be trusted. I let him poison me against you, and I'm sorry. The words hit harder than any legal victory. For the first time in years, I saw my sister not as an enemy, but as someone trapped in a web she hadn't built. Thomas surged to his feet, face twisted with rage. She's lying! They're both lying! This whole court is— Bailiff, remove him, Judge Carter ordered. 2 bailiffs closed in. Thomas shouted, struggling as they escorted him out, his voice echoing down the hall. This isn't over! You'll regret this! The doors slammed shut behind him. The silence that followed was profound. Judge Carter exhaled slowly, then looked toward the jury. You have now seen what this case truly is. It is not about a veteran's competence. It is about greed, deception, and criminal misconduct. The court will proceed, but understand that the district attorney's office will be pursuing this matter further. The jurors nodded solemnly. Some even cast glances of sympathy in my direction. Valeria remained standing, trembling, before lowering herself back into her seat. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. For the first time since the trial began, she looked younger, fragile like the sister I had once known, before Thomas's poison. The defense scrambled to regroup, but their case was shattered. Their star witness had been exposed as a forger. Their secondary defendant had broken ranks, and the jury had witnessed it all in real time. I sat tall at my table, hands folded, letting the silence do the rest. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to gloat. The truth had finally taken the stand, and it was stronger than any weapon Thomas could forge. When court adjourned for the day, reporters crowded the courthouse steps. Headlines were already rewriting themselves. Fake VA records exposed. Trust battle turns criminal. Sister breaks silence in a state war. I walked past the microphones without answering, my attorney shielding me with a raised hand. Inside, my heart pounded not with fear, but with something else, relief. For years, I had carried the burden of silence. Now, that silence had turned into proof, and the lies that once threatened to erase me were collapsing under their own weight. But the fight wasn't quite over. The trust had yet to be formally affirmed, the verdict had yet to be spoken, and my father's voice still echoed in my chest. Protect it, Elena, even from those who share our name. And I intended to do exactly that. The final day of trial dawned with a stillness that felt like the air before a storm. The gallery was full, the press packed shoulder to shoulder in the back rows. Valeria sat alone now, eyes downcast, her hands clenched in her lap. Thomas was absent, still in custody after his outburst. Judge Carter entered, his gavel striking once. This court has reviewed the evidence, the testimony, and the misconduct revealed in these proceedings. Today, we deliver judgment. The jurors filed in, their expressions sober, unreadable. My heart hammered in my chest, though I kept my posture rigid. The judge's voice was measured, but every syllable carried the weight of law. The court finds that the trust established by the late Colonel Miguel Cruz is valid and binding. The appointment of Captain Elena Cruz as sole trustee is affirmed. All attempts to invalidate this trust were based on fraudulent documents and coercion. He paused, scanning the room. Furthermore, the matter of forged federal records will be referred to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution of Mr. Thomas Grayson. His conduct has not only corrupted these proceedings, but insulted the integrity of this court. The gallery erupted, reporters scribbling, whispers flying. I didn't move. I simply let the words settle, heavy and final. Judge Carter's tone softened slightly. Miss Cruz, this verdict does more than restore your rights. It recognizes the trust your father placed in you. You have carried yourself with the dignity expected of a soldier, and this court acknowledges that. I bowed my head slightly. For the first time, I felt the weight of vindication pressing not as a burden, but as relief. Valeria rose slowly, trembling. Your Honor, she said, her voice breaking. I accept the ruling. I was blind. I let myself be manipulated. I can't take back the damage, but I want my sister to know I'm sorry." The courtroom hushed. Her words weren't part of the record, but they mattered. For me, they mattered more than the judgment. The judge nodded gravely. Acknowledged. When court adjourned, I stepped outside into the sunlight, the press shouting my name. But this time, the headlines were different. No longer unstable veteran. Now, Cruz restored as trustee. Fraud uncovered in trust battle. Veteran defends legacy. Weeks later, the estate was officially transferred into my sole control. The house, the land, the accounts all intact. But I didn't just guard them for myself. I took my father's words to heart. That fall, I founded the Sentinel Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to supporting female veterans navigating life after service. The family home became its headquarters. The dining room that once echoed with silence, now filled with voices, women sharing stories, finding resources, building community. Valeria came to visit one evening. She stood in the doorway, hesitant, clutching a bouquet of wildflowers. "I know I don't deserve to be here," she whispered, "but I'd like to try again, as your sister." I let her in. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it gives truth a seat at the table. Sometimes I sit alone in my father's study, the strongbox still resting under the desk. His letter lies framed on the wall above me. "Protected, Elena. Even from those who share our name." I protected it, but I also turned it into something more. Because justice in court is one thing, justice in family is harder. And real justice, the kind that lasts, means transforming wounds into legacies. So if you're still here listening, this is my message to you. No smear campaign, no betrayal, no forged paper can erase the truth of who you are. Hold the line, carry your honor. And when the lies fall away, let your life itself be the verdict. Subscribe, share your story in the comments, and remember, truth may be buried, but it never dies.